Hey there, fans of the strange, dark, and mysterious. If you're into stories that make your skin crawl and keep you up at night, then buckle up because this one's a doozy. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there?
Trapped in the haunted cave for days. An American account from the Ozark backcountry in the late autumn of 2019, the first cold front of the season slid over northern Arkansas and turned the hardwoods the color of banked embers. By the end of that week, the wind moved in long inland breaths, drawing leaves across County Road 37 and rattling the cattails in the ditch. I was driving my old slate-colored pickup toward the Boston Mountains, past farms with tin roofs and rusted propane tanks, toward a limestone ridge the locals called Sparrow's Spine. Folklore in these hills travels farther than cell service, and I had come to write about it. I was freelancing then, living from one assignment to the next, nursing a quiet hunger for stories that could hold a room the way a hymn holds a chapel. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? My name is Lysander Pike. People call me Pike. I never sought out ghosts. I preferred the living. But a tip had landed in my inbox about a cave above a dry creek bed. A cave that took and kept things. A cave that talked when the wind was off the river and the hollows were still. The note had been signed only with the name Thaddeus and a cross street in Kingston where I could meet him. He never showed. He sent one last text that read, "Simply go before the hunters wake the ridge, and then silence stretched like wire. I went anyway. Pride can be a poor lantern." I parked at the trailhead just after daybreak on a Saturday, mist in the low ground and a hawk riding a bright seam of air. The signboard, riddled with 22 holes, warned about karst hazards, sinkholes, sudden drop-offs, flash flooding. A violet ribbon was tied to the post, as if someone had left a reminder for themselves and never returned. I should have been discouraged. Instead, I shouldered my pack, clipped my headlamp to the strap, and walked until the gravel turned to bare rock, and the bare rock turned to dead leaves that whispered with each step. Sparrow's Spine is a long ridge, honeycombed and hollowed by old water that has long since moved elsewhere. The entrance to the cave did not look like a mouth, so much as an eyelid half closed against the light. I had expected a tourist cave with handrails and a kiosk. What I found was a bruise in the earth, a shadow where no shadow should have lingered. The air at the threshold cooled my sweat in an instant. Beyond it, the world tightened and thinned. The first chamber was low enough that I had to bow, then crawl, and then blessedly stand. Moonbird Cave, the old men at the feed store had called it. No map, no tours, a dry system most of the year, they said, except when it was not. Bring a buddy, they advised. I did not. I had a tripod, a small recorder, a thermos of coffee, a packet of jerky, a notebook, a pen, and the confidence of a man who had been lucky too many times to believe that luck was finite. Inside, sound changed its mind about what it wanted to be. Every step made a small thunder. Every breath carried farther than it needed to. I clicked on my headlamp, then my backup light, and the walls sprang forward, racked and pitted and damp. The floor was a history of water written in ribs of limestone. A faint smell of penny metal threaded the air. I said my name out loud because I once read that if you want to stay anchored underground, you should tell the dark who you are. Lysander Pike, I said, and my voice came back in tatters. Present, I added, because that felt necessary. I moved deeper. Time lost its usual close. There were no sunbeams to cut the hours, only the steady drip from the ceiling and the patient hush of unseen chambers ahead. After what might have been an hour or only a long breath, I found a place where the ceiling rose and the room widened. A tumble of breakdown stones made a rough staircase to a second level. Off to my left, a passage narrowed into a keyhole slit. Wind stroked my cheek there, cold as a hand washed in creek water. The recorder in my pocket vibrated. Without thinking, I pulled it out and pressed record. The red dot bloomed. At first I heard nothing but my own breath and the hiss of the lamp. Then it came, as soft as lint, a voice tucked into the breeze. Not words, not yet, a cadence. A sort of syllabic reaching, as if someone were trying to speak with a mouthful of sleep. The hair along my forearms lifted. I tilted the microphone toward the slit and waited. The wind deepened. Something like a name threaded through the air. Thad. Thad. I swallowed. Thaddeus, I whispered, and the cave returned one long thaw, like a string being pulled through a ring. If this was a prank, it was exquisite and cruel. If it was geology, it was a coincidence wearing a mask. I told myself I would gather a minute of room tone and go. I told myself I would not wedge my shoulders through that aperture. I went in anyway. The keyhole shaved my jacket and grated my belt buckle. The limestone kissed my ribs. I exhaled and slid, held my breath, wriggled, then fell 2 body lengths into a sump of cold air where the floor dropped without being polite about it. I landed hard on my left side, breath gone, headlamp skidding into a wedge of stones where the beam pinned itself on a stalagmite like a pinned moth. The sound I made was small and embarrassing. I lay there, tasting copper, and let my breath find its way back to me. When I tried to stand, my ankle buckled. I sat again and cursed, then laughed, because laughter sometimes convinces pain that it is not welcome. My headlamp was still shining. My backup light was around my neck on a cord. My pack had stayed with me. My radio, which I had not charged as carefully as I should have, was clipped to the strap and blinking a sullen amber. I checked my ankle. A sprain. I could put weight on it if I made a bargain with myself about the pace. I gathered my lamp. I gathered my pride. I gathered the little recorder and listened. The cave was speaking in its sleep again, the same reaching, the same soft TH sounds, as if stone had learned how to whisper through missing teeth. I meant to reverse my route, but the fissure I had slid through had become another fissure, then another. The tight throat that had admitted me became a dozen throats wearing the same expression. I tried one, then another, then a third, and came back to the same room where my scuff marks crossed themselves like a bad signature. Heat rose under my jacket. Panic tends to oversalt the soup. I sat on my pack and drank coffee from the thermos. It had gone lukewarm, but it steadied my hands. I told the dark who I was again, not because the dark needed to know, but because I did. Lysander Pike. Present, I said, and I added, not lost yet. My voice cracked on the last word. The recorder caught it. I searched for high ground. Caves are maps that refuse to be folded the same way twice. I tried the keyhole in reverse, found a lip, found another, then found only a pinch that owned my chest and would not let go. I backed out carefully. I was not going to die in a choke if I had a choice. I needed a different route and more light than my headlamps could provide. I took stock. Jerky. A half loaf of cornbread wrapped in wax paper. 2 liters of water. The thermos. A foil blanket. A lighter. A pencil and the notebook. A slim paperback collection of ballads I had brought for company and never intended to open. My phone, now a brick. The radio, which blinked at me like a bored reptile. I turned it on and called my own name as if I were 2 people, static like dry leaves. I thought of Thaddeus and felt a private dread. The way you feel when you know a letter will not arrive because the postman no longer walks that road. Afternoon, by whatever clock lives inside the body, slid toward evening. The cave's air cooled in a way that told me there was a vast volume somewhere nearby, breathing in and out with the changes above. I gathered rocks and spelled help on a flat shelf, not because I believed a person would see it, but because the gesture put my hands to work. Then I did something I never do. I sang a song I learned from a coal miner in eastern Kentucky. My voice was unremarkable, but the cave liked it. It returned the notes one at a time and dressed them in velvet. When I finished, the wind in the keyhole passage released a word that landed clean. Gooseflesh everywhere at once. I whispered thank you without meaning to. The lamp hummed like an insect. I slept for a while with my back against the breakdown pile, the foil blanket loud in the silence. Dreams came in mineral colors. I woke unsure whether seconds or hours had passed. Hunger pressed the edges of my temper. I ate a small square of cornbread and a curl of jerky, then drank a careful mouthful of water. The second day was a braid of trial and error. I marked with pencil every stone I climbed, every ridge I slid along, left arrows on damp surfaces, and dripped coffee to stain the floor where the pencil could not find purchase. The room sprawled into rooms. The keyhole gave way to a trench. The trench stepped down into a vault, where the ceiling was night and my lamps were starlight. In the vault, something waited. Bones rested in a pocket of dust, not arranged, not scattered by predators, but set aside the way a man sets aside his hat before sleep. A tin canteen, pitted and mended with solder, a blackened pipe, a scrap of blue cloth that had once belonged to a shirt and remembered a shoulder. A name scratched in the limestone with a nail or a luckier rock. Thad. The letters were deep, the way a person carves when they do not plan to leave quickly. My throat closed. I touched the T, the H, the A, the D, and found the edges dulled by time. Wind moved and the cloth stirred. The recorder listened. I do not know what I expected to hear. A prayer, a confession, a song. What I heard was a hush, like a tired breath. Then a voice so close to my ear that I flinched and struck my shoulder against stone. Lysander, the cave, said again, almost kindly. Then, lower, a word that sounded like stay. No, I said out loud, and the word fled in a panic that felt like my own. I do not know if I was speaking to the stone or to the part of myself that began to understand how easy it would be to stay. Underground, there is a mercy. There are no bills, no deadlines, no questions about whether you wasted your luck or squandered somebody else's patience. There is only yes and no, breath and no breath. I tied the blue cloth around my wrist and stood. The radio crackled once like a match. A voice arrived, faint as ash. Search and rescue, the voice said. Identify. I sat down hard. My own name felt extravagant. Lysander Pike, I said. Moonbird Cave, Sparrow's Spine, north of Kingston. Sprained ankle, diminishing light. Food for a day and a half if I am careful, water for maybe 2. I do not know the time. I am not sure how far in I am. I am not alone. The last sentence left my mouth before I could censor it. Static returned. Then, the voice. Clearer. Repeat last, the dispatcher said. Are you with a second party? I looked at the bones in the canteen and the quiet blue cloth tied to me. I closed my eyes. Negative, I said. Not a second party, just an impression. I am sorry. Copy, the voice said. Stay put if you can. We will stage at the trailhead. Do you have 2 light sources? Do not move into unmapped passage. Conserve your battery. We will call again. The radio went empty. The cave exhaled. My ankle throbbed the way an old grudge throbs. I propped my foot on my pack and breathed through the hurt. For a while, I talked to the person whose pipe had been left behind. Thaddeus, I said, and the cave tried to repeat it and failed because caves have no tongues for the D sounds. I told him what I could see, which was my way of reminding myself what was real. I made a list of sensory facts, as if writing a grocery list to anchor the afternoon. The air was colder in the vault than in the trench. The rock wore mineral beards. The chalk line of a fossil shell curved along a ledge like a secret smile. Far away, water traveled inside the walls, steady, patient, sure. I slept again in fits, woke with my mouth full of the taste of old pennies. I dreamed of a boy lost in a wheat field, his mother calling his name until her voice wore thin. I dreamed of a mineshaft prop blowing apart, of men counting their friends when they came up and finding the count incomplete. I dreamed of the radio as a chapel bell. The third day, when hunger became a new religion and thirst took 1/10 of my patience per hour, the cave started to show me its temper. A rush of air came down the trench, as if somebody had opened a door in a big house. Pebbles skipped. A thin trickle of dust sifted from the ceiling and coated my tongue. I swallowed and tasted the past. My lamps burned old. The backup light grew jumpy as a fevered animal. I rationed both and used them in shifts, listening to my own heartbeat when the dark settled in like a large, soft animal. I thought about the first story I had ever written that mattered, about a tornado that passed over an unincorporated town at 3 a.m. and left a loaf of bread uncut on a kitchen counter where there had been no kitchen. I thought about the preacher who told me you can bless a place by speaking gently to it. I thought about a girl named Ione who once told me that there is a difference between being alone and being solitary. Alone, she said, is a bruise. Solitary is a stone warmed by your own hand. I wanted a stone I could warm. Instead, I had limestone, cold and indifferent as a ledger. The radio cracked again. The voice had changed. A woman this time, steady and brisk. Lysander Pike, this is Deputy Marigold Tiller with the Madison County Sheriff's Office. We have 2 teams on the ridge and a 3rd at the lower hollow. We need you to speak every half minute for the next 5 minutes. Use the word lantern. We will listen for your voice and for any resonant frequencies. If you can strike metal on rock, do that as well. Lantern, I said, and the word traveled until I could hear it, returning from places I had no wish to meet yet. I struck my canteen lighter than I remembered it, against a knob of stone. The cave took the ring and tuned it like a piano wire. Lantern? I said again. Softer, so the echoes would not step on one another. Lantern? A pause. Lantern? Good, Deputy Tiller said. Again. Lantern. Copy, she said. Hold. I held. Time settled on my shoulders like an unfamiliar coat. I counted my breaths and lost track and started again. I thought of sunlight as an action verb instead of a thing. I ate the last of the cornbread and saved the last of the jerky for when the tremor in my hands became unignorable. In the vault, the air changed. The blue cloth at my wrist lifted once like a gesture of acknowledgement. Voices came next, too faint to claim at first, then braided with static. Hold your place, Mr. Pike, a man said, voice disembodied, a little hollow. We think we have you on the right flank. If you hear 3 whistles, respond with 2. I listened. The cave listened with me. Then, ghost thin, 3 shrill chirps stuttered across the vault. I brought my fingers to my lips and blew 2 whistles as best I could. They were small and apologetic. The cave gathered them up and returned something like courage. Good, the man said. Again, 2 whistles, silence, then a boom somewhere far off that might have been a stone moving where stones ought not to move. The radio hissed. Deputy Tiller's voice crossed the hiss like a stepping stone. Mr. Pike, we have a barometric drop and radar shows a pop-up cell on the county line. If water enters the system, we will have to pull back. We are pushing 1 more team toward you. If the water finds you first, climb. Do you copy? Climb if you feel any draft change. Get as high as you can and tie yourself in if you have any cordage. We will not risk the team in a surge. Do you copy? I copied. My mouth had gone chalk dry. The word climb found very little to hold onto inside me. My ankle thrummed a hazard note. The wind came first, but not the friendly searching draft that brings you news from the entrance. This one shouldered in without apology. The cave spoke in a lower register. Pebbles danced. Dust fell. I swore out loud and pushed my pack beneath the breakdown lip. The bones in the alcove looked at me without looking. The blue cloth tugged at my wrist. I shouted up the trench and heard the trench answer. I limped toward the highest part of the vault where the walls narrowed into a chimney. The chimney was a rough throat. A man could braced climb it if he wanted to feel his shoulders grind into history. I wanted that. I shoved my back into one side and my boots into the other and made my way up like an awkward beetle. Halfway up, the water arrived. It was not a roar at first. It was a sound like a classroom of children whispering, then like prairie wind in a fence, then like a sudden 1,000 hands clapping once. When it rounded the bend below, it brought a smell that made me think of a river wrenching its way through winter. The first lick ran across my boot and chilled me straight through to my lungs. I climbed harder than I knew I could. My shoulders slid, my ankles shrieked. The chimney narrowed and became kinder for a brief, blessed moment. I found a shelf and dragged myself onto it. The shelf was as wide as my hips and as long as a short child. I pressed my chest to the stone and shook. The water spoke louder now, the way a crowd speaks on courthouse steps. Mr. Pike, the radio cried, thin, frantic. If you are in the vault, climb as high as possible. Say lantern if you can. Say anything. Lantern, I croaked and coughed. The words slid off the water and came back to me torn into syllables. I tied my belt around a knob and then around my waist. The shelf tilted in a way that told me it had been waiting for its moment for 100,000 years. I kissed it out of some ancient instinct. I do not kiss many things. This felt earned. For a while, there was only the sound of the flood teaching the cave a new song. In the calamitous music, a smaller voice found me. It was not Thaddeus, it was a woman's voice, distant and sure. "Hold, Lysander," she said, as if we were at a river crossing together. "Just hold." I held. The water climbed, then paused, then climbed again. It filled the trench and the lower room and licked the edge of the shelf, and then mercifully stopped as if it had remembered an appointment elsewhere. I learned then that gratitude can be as physical as hunger. I cried without sound, and the cave took the salt and made no remark. When the water went out, it left silt and a smell like wet stone. It left room, it left a clean shine on the bones. It left me shaking and breathing like a man who had run a race inside a straw. The radio came back in tatters. "We have to pull the lower teams," Deputy Tiller said. "We will wait for the surge to pass. If you can shelter in place, do so. We will come when we can come." I said copy, and the word was a scratch on old paper. I slept with my belt tied and my cheek pressed to limestone. I dreamed of the hawk I had seen over the road, how it rode a seam of air that was not visible but was there just the same. When I woke, the cave had gone back to its long patience. Time returned in small sips. My lamps met each other's eyes like exhausted friends. I could hold them both on low for a day if the batteries didn't lie. I ate the last of the jerky and sucked the last drops from the canteen and told myself I was not going to barter with thirst. I removed the belt and tested my ankle. It answered with fire, but it held. I spoke softly to the vault. I read from the small book of ballads until the words felt like people in the room. When I read the stanza about a woman who waited at a window for 3 winters and then married the sea, a draft lifted the page and turned it for me. I laughed, a thin thread of sound. I think I said thank you again. If anyone ever plays back the recorder, they will hear a man who has been humbled by limestone and weather and the sound of his own name coming back to him with a different temperature. The voices returned nearer than before, not from the radio, but from the doorways of the earth. I heard the careful clink of a carabiner. I heard the slow, measured exhale of someone trying to make their breath weigh less. I heard a whisper. "Mr. Pike," a man said, voice low to keep from knocking anything loose. "If you can hear me, strike your lamp twice." I did. 2 small flares on the shelf. The light met other light and made a modest marriage in the air. A helmeted face appeared below the lip of the shelf, then another. Mud painted both. The first man had a square jaw and eyes that looked like they had been awake for a very long time. "Name's Cormac," he said. "This is Ione. We've got you." I made a sound that could have been any child's first word. I scooted forward on my hip bones. The shelf complained in a voice at the edge of hearing. Cormac reached up, clipped a loop to my belt, and set his feet in a stance that said he had carried other people out of other places, and none of them had been light. Ione steadied my headlamp with one hand and set the other on my shoulder. Her touch was specific and respectful, the way a person touches a door that is not theirs. "We're going to lower you a hair to get your legs under," she said, "because people who do this work learn to narrate as a form of mercy. Then, we're going to bring you up to this higher bench and get a harness under you proper, you with us." "Yes," I said, and the word arrived intact for the first time in a long time. The movement hurt. There was no reason to pretend otherwise. The ankle spat lightning. My back argued. My elbows made a list of grievances. We moved anyway. The shelf let me go. The chimney accepted me. The bench caught me like an ant who has been waiting at the edge of a dance floor. I sat, shaking in a way that embarrassed me, and Ione buckled me into a harness that looked like a miracle built out of webbing and confidence. The route out was not the route in. That is true of so many things. We rose through the chimney, one slow foot at a time, the 3 of us breathing like a small choir. In the trench, the silt made our boots whisper. In the high room, our lights braided and unbraided, and the cave returned a little of our warmth. Once, at a turn, Cormac paused and cocked his head. "Hear that," he said. I heard it too. Not voices, not water. A long, familiar quiet that meant the world above was ready to accept us again. I cried again. because daylight had become something like a person I missed, and the idea of being introduced to them filled me with a relief that made me generous toward everything, even toward my own mistakes. At the last squeeze, we found the keyhole, the one that had admitted me casually and then refused to admit me again. It had changed its posture with the surge, or perhaps I had... Cormac went first with that square patience. He turned and reached for me. Exhale, he said, calm as weather. All the way. Let the ribcage be an accordion. You are an accordion, friend. Good. Now, slide. Good. I slid. The rock took attacks in skin and pride. I approved the commission. On the other side, the air moved with a rhythm I recognized from every porch I have ever sat on. Ione came last, bringing the end of the rope and the certainty that had kept us all from doing anything foolish. Then we were in the entry chamber, which had become a cathedral since last I saw it. The light pouring through the eyelid of an opening felt like a person's hand on my cheek. I reached for it without meaning to. Someone laughed softly in the way you laugh in churches when joy and relief forget they are supposed to be quiet. Outside, the sky had the exact blue of enamelware, the trees had kept their fire. Deputy Marigold Tiller stood by the signboard with the ribbon and the bullet holes, her radio at her shoulder and 2 cups of something steaming in her hands. When she saw me, she did not lift the cups. She did something better. She nodded once, the way people do when a story has resolved, and when I reached her, she put one of the cups in my hand without ceremony. You had us worried, Mr. Pike, she said. 3 days is not nothing. The Ridge is greedy this year. I said I was sorry, though I am not sure what I meant by that. Sorry that I went alone. Sorry that I underestimated Limestone. Sorry that Thaddeus had not been the first person they let out. She saw the cloth tied around my wrist. He's been missing since the summer of 2014, she said. Folks have guesses. We do not say them out loud. I touched the knot. I found his name in there, I said. And a pipe. And a canteen. She nodded as if we were talking about rain barrels and fence posts, because acknowledgement is not the same as drama. We will go back when the water is done being a fool, she said. We will bring him what we can. You drink that. Then we will look at that ankle. I drank. It was not coffee. It was broth that tasted like somebody's grandmother had stood at a stove and decided I would need forgiving. Heat came back to my hands. Birds had remembered their jobs. A truck door slammed. Somebody laughed in a way that balanced how close we had all been to not laughing at all. I stood shakily and the world let me. I asked one question, though I understood already that the answer might not help. Do you ever hear things in there? I said. In your radio, in your own head, names, instructions, requests. Deputy Tiller looked at the cave, then at me. We hear what we need to hear to do our work, she said, and we try to leave the rest where it belongs. Some places make echoes that keep a shape for a very long time. That is not a haunting. That is the land reminding itself who it has been. The wind moved along Sparrow's spine and made a sound like a long breath through teeth. Somewhere high up a hawk held the sky in its hands. I untied the cloth from my wrist and gave it to Marigold Tiller. She tucked it into her pocket as if it were a note from a child. Cormac and Ione loaded me into the back of a county truck that smelled like rope and leather and coffee. As we rattled down the road, past the cattails, past the farms with their tin roofs and the rusted propane tanks, past a mailbox painted with sunflowers, I watched the ridge recede in the side mirror. It looked like a sleeping animal. It looked like a hymn unwritten. It looked like a mouth closed at last. In the days that followed, I listened to the recorder. I expected a chorus of strangenesses. I found only the things I had said and the things the rescue team had said and the music of water rehearsing its argument. But there was one place early on where the air sounded almost like a voice trying on a name. Whether it was the cave or my fear does not bear deciding, the living need their myths and the land needs its privacy. My ankle healed with a limp that grew smaller until it joined the list of aches a body accepts. I sent the story to my editor, and he sent me a note that said, only this one feels true. I wrote back and told him that truth sometimes wears someone else's coat for a while, and that I was trying to be patient with how slowly it takes the coat off. In late winter, when the maples were making small red fists, Deputy Tiller called me from the county line. They had gone back in. They found the pipe and the canteen and the letters on the wall. They found what they could, and the family had a place to stand and say a man's name into the air. She did not say the word closure. She did not need to. Some endings arrived, like doors shutting softly in a house you once lived in. I drove back to Sparrow's Spine with flowers that would not mind the cold, and left them at the entrance where the light keeps its promises. I spoke a blessing in a voice that still remembered how to be small. Then I turned away and walked the road back to my truck, each step louder in the open air, each breath a little less borrowed, the ridge behind me humming the last line of a song the way hills do when they decide a story has earned its quiet. Next stories. The night a missing boy was found alive in the Ashburn houses. They still call it the longest night Marrow Creek ever lived through. The town sits in a fold of Pennsylvania hills where the wind carries the river's smell and the soot of old rail lines. On a Wednesday in late October in the year 2014, the sky went the color of pewter by 3 in the afternoon, and the wind combed the sycamores until their pale leaves rattled like small bones. By dusk, a siren wailed from the volunteer fire hall, one long cry, and the search began. The boy's name was Orrin Hale. He was 9. He had a cowlick, like a whitecap, and a habit of counting his steps when he was nervous. He had been walking home from the after-school art club held in the church basement, carrying a shoebox diorama of a lighthouse. He never arrived. His mother, Maeve Hale, called the sheriff at 6:40, her voice small but steady. By 7, the first flashlight beams were sweeping the ditches and hedgerows along Rivermill Road. By 8, the state police had set out flares, and orange vests moved like cautious sparks across the fields. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Whispers rose the way steam rises from a pot. People spoke of the Ashburn house. Everyone knew that crumbling mansion at the far end of Wicket Lane, 2 stories of black windows and a roofline like broken teeth. It had stood empty since the late 1980s after a winter fire and a court fight over the estate. Teenagers dared each other to run up the porch steps and touch the door, then sprint back, laughing too loudly. Hunters said foxes denned beneath the porch. Older folks said other things, murmured things, about the sound of a piano in the night when no one lived there, about a smell of coal smoke after rain, about a single lamp seen in an attic window long after the power was cut. Deputy Lyle Pritchard had a map spread on the hood of his cruiser. He was a quiet man with a rain-creased face and the habit of pinching his lower lip when he was thinking. By 9, the map was speckled with the tiny thumbtack lights of cell phones, the search grids had been drawn, everyone was expected to check sheds, culverts, hedges, and the thickets by the old quarry. The deputy had to decide whether to include the Ashburn house in the sweep. He did not like superstition. He liked hinges that worked and doors that opened and shut. He liked facts. Orrin had last been seen a mile from Wicket Lane. The house was within the radius. It would be checked. At 9:30, the first team went up Wicket Lane. The lane itself was a sullen ribbon full of potholes that held old leaves and cold water. The wind made a low sound in the maples, a long hush, as if someone were shushing a crowd that did not want to be silent. The house appeared all at once, as if the trees had been hiding it. The porch sagged. The widow's walk was missing 3 balusters. A strand of police tape from some forgotten training exercise flicked in the wind and made a dry sound like the turning of a page. Calliope Vance, a reporter from the county paper, arrived just before 10. She wore boots that had seen election nights, barn fires, and county fairs. She kept a notebook in her pocket with half the pages dog-eared. She had a way of standing still in noise, as if she could hear the quiet thing inside the loud thing. She saw Maeve Hale arrive, coat thrown over pajamas, hair pulled into a knot so tight it made the lines on her forehead shine. She saw the way the crowd parted for Maeve, and the way Maeve kept looking down as if her eyes could comb the ground for her child. Calliope crossed herself without thinking. She was not especially devout, but the night made her do it. Just after 10:15, they broke the lock on the Ashburn house. The padlock had a patina of years on it, a skin of rust the color of dried blood, and the shank sheared with a crack that sounded much louder than it should have. The door swung inward, slow and complaining, and a smell came out that made even the boldest man take a step back. It was the smell of wet wood and old varnish and something faintly sweet like wilted flowers in a closed room. There is a moment in any search when bravado drains and procedure steps forward. Pritchard raised a hand. 2 officers and 2 volunteers moved in with lamps, held low. The lamps made circles on the floorboards where dust had gathered like light snow. Their footsteps were careful. Someone called out, another answered. The house answered too, with all the small night noises that old wood makes when light and air enter after long absence. The foyer showed a staircase that turned, then turned again, and disappeared into darkness. On the right was a parlor with a massive cold fireplace and high formal windows. On the left, double doors to a room that had once been a music room. A harp stool stood on 3 legs, its 4th broken, and the stool leaned the way a listening person leans. The wallpaper had a pattern of silver leaves that the light could not help chasing. They cleared the first floor, they found a nest of raccoon tracks, and the shed skin of a snake curled behind a radiator like a forgotten ribbon. They found graffiti under the stairs in a schoolgirl hand that said simply, mercy. They found nothing else. Pritchard turned his lamp up the stairs. They would go higher. Time hooks itself to small things. 10:30 felt like a held breath. 10:33 felt like a door unlocked in the chest. 10:35 felt like every nerve was an eye. At 10:37, a sound came down from above. It was not the theatrical bang of a shutter in wind. It was not the complaint of a loose board. It was the soft, careful sound of something set down. Light swept the landing. Dust rose in a body. Then, as if the house itself had been practicing the word, a voice, here. The word was small, not more than a thread of sound in a room woven of echoes. But it was a word, and it was human, and it was near. Pritchard's lamp found the 2nd floor hall. Doors, shadows, a picture frame that held only a ghost of sun-bleached cardboard. He said the boy's name the way you say a prayer, Orrin. Silence answered, then the brave ghost of a second here. They found him in a back bedroom beneath an eave that slanted low like a conspirator. He sat on the floor, back against the bed frame, diorama box clutched to his chest. He was pale under the dust. His shoelaces were double knotted in a way that said his mother taught him good habits and he had tried to keep them. His lips were blue at the edges from the cold. His eyes were clear. He looked like a boy who had been quiet for a long time. The first word he said when Pritchard knelt was please, and the second was careful, and the third was light. They thought at first that he meant the lamp, and they turned it away. He shook his head. He looked past them, to the open door, to the dark hall beyond. He whispered, not afraid, not even excited, just very certain. It does not like bright light. They wrapped him in a quilt someone brought from the trunk of a car, one of those old pieced quilts whose seams hold the patience of 2 generations. They gave him water in a cup with a chipped lip. He drank without spilling. When Maeve reached the room, she made no sound at all. She knelt. She put her hands on either side of his face. The sound she made then was the sound people make when a weight that was going to kill them is lifted at the last second. Downstairs, someone cried into a sleeve. Outside, the town, which had been holding its breath, exhaled. They carried Orrin out past the harp stool and the radiant stove sign fallen from the pantry wall, past the front door and the glistening wet leaves and the police tape that had been retied. The wind met them and made everyone blink. Flashbulbs popped from phones. Calliope did not raise hers. She wrote what she felt in one thin line on her notepad. Found alive. 10:42. In the Ashburn house. They took him to the ambulance. The medic's hands were brisk, and his voice was the kind of gentle that has been practiced until it is as sturdy as oak. He looked at pupils, at fingernails, at the pink return to the nail beds. He checked the pulse and wrote the number with a pen that would not work, and then did the thing medics do, shook the pen with sharp little snaps until the ink had no choice but to behave. Orrin watched the pen as if it were a small animal. People wanted to talk. That is what people want when fear drains and the body remembers that it is still warm. They wanted to say, I knew it would be all right, even if they had not known. Or, I always said that house wasn't as bad as folks made it, even if they had crossed the street to avoid it for years. Calliope stood aside, listening. Maeve sat in the ambulance door with one foot on the bumper. Oren rested, the quilt around his shoulders like a cape that had done its duty. At 11, the deputy came to ask careful questions. Where had he been? How had he gotten there? What did he remember? Oren's answers came in that strange calm that sometimes happens after a long fright, a calm that is not pretend, not bravado, not shock, but a child's plain report. He had left the church basement and walked past the candy store where the window held chocolate turkeys arrayed like a small army. He had crossed Rivermill Road. He had gone by the chain link fence with the sun-faded no trespassing sign. The wind had gotten very loud, and he thought he heard a note inside it, the way you sometimes hear the hum of a refrigerator when the room tries to be quiet. He had looked up and seen a light in the distance where there should not be any. He knew the Ashburn house from whispers, but the light had not been in the front. It had winked in a high window toward the back, like an eye that forgot to close. He did not remember choosing to turn. He only remembered the sense of being looked at, not meanly, not hungrily, but with the attention of a hand reaching to catch a falling cup. He had gone up Wicket Lane. The porch had creaked under his feet, and the door, which people said was always locked, had been unlatched. He had stepped inside and said hello the way you do when you walk into a home that is not yours. And then he had told Pritchard it had felt like someone put a shawl over the house. The wind stopped. The little ticks and murmurs of old wood became a whisper that moved along the walls. He did not feel afraid. He felt instructed, as if some arrangement had been made, and he had arrived right on time. He had walked to the back bedroom. He had sat down. He had put the diorama on his knees. He had waited. Pritchard wrote this down. He wrote it down even though he did not understand it. He wrote it down because understanding is not required of a report, only truth, and the boy's voice had the honest burr of truth. Maeve asked if anyone had been there with him. Oren considered. No people, he said finally. He looked at the window as if it contained a second, clear world laid over the first. But I think the house was not empty. The deputy glanced at the reporter. Calliope's pen paused. A fragment of wind lifted the edge of her page. She looked at the house. Its windows accepted the night like old eyes accept tears. People stayed even after the medic said everyone should go home. The human need to stand near a place where something has ended well is strong. It warms us like a stove. A pastor led a low prayer near the porch. Teenagers who had crossed the tape made up a story they would agree to tell their friends, leaving out their own trembling hands. Someone fetched cocoa in cardboard cups with lids that sipped poorly and left a mark on the upper lip like a child's milk mustache. In the dark, the sycamores moved their long white limbs like a slow-motion semaphore that only the river could read. Just after midnight, the first snowflake came. It was early for snow, but late for luck, and people felt the difference. The flake passed through the beam of a flashlight and dissolved against a jacket sleeve, and memories shifted, the way memories do, to make room for a better story. Before one, the crowd thinned. The ambulances had left, the tape had been pulled tight again and tied in a square knot that would hold. Maeve took her boy home, the quilt around both of them, so that for a moment they looked like a single figure, one life stitched to another. Pritchard stood alone in the lane, his cruiser idling, the map still on the hood, the thumbtack lights now only the cold ornaments of his own thoughts. Calliope did not leave. She stood on the shoulder with her notebook in her pocket, and her hands in her coat, and her breath making brief ghosts. She watched the house until watching turned into a kind of listening. That was when she heard it. Not a piano, despite the old stories. Not a voice either, not exactly. It was the frictionless sound of something being put right. A hinge seating in a jam, a loose board settling, a thread pulled through the last eye of a needle and tied off neatly, a house exhaling. The sensation moved through her like a line of warm tea. When she got back to the paper, near 2 a.m, she wrote. She knew exactly how the first paragraph would read, and how the last would settle, and how to keep the space between them honest. She wrote in present tense, because for the town, the night would always be happening, always arriving at its mercy. And when she came to the part about the light in the attic window, she paused. She did not embellish it. She did not deny it. She wrote the light as a fact in the boy's account and left it there, like a candle on a sill, enough to walk by. In the days that followed, Marrow Creek did what towns do. They brought casseroles to the Hale house and left them with notes in big pen handwriting. They pinned a thank you banner to the fence at the fire hall. Little kids drew chalk lighthouses on the sidewalk. A local carpenter named Eban Dorsey went to the Ashburn house with a toolbox and a thermos and replaced the missing balusters on the Widow's Walk because it upset him to see a railing unready to keep a person safe. He did it without permission and with such competent love that even the town clerk, who worried about liability, could only shake her head and bring him coffee. One morning, a week later, Maeve brought the shoebox diorama to the school. It had survived intact. The lighthouse was made of a paper towel tube and painted in red and white bands with a fine hand. Oren had cut small windows and lined them in black marker. The light at the top was a foil-wrapped marble that threw a tiny cold gleam if you tilted the box near a window. He spoke to his class without drama. He said, "I thought of the light the whole time, and when I was afraid of the dark, I looked at the lighthouse and tried to be the person who kept the lamp trimmed and shining." That night, Pritchard went back to the house alone. He parked at the foot of the lane and walked up with a lamp, not because he believed the boy's words the way a child believes a spell, but because he had taken them into himself and found no harm in honoring them. He stood on the porch for a long time, the wind stuttering over the roof, the late leaves scuttering across the boards. He did not cross the threshold. He did not need to. On the way back to the cruiser, he met Eban the carpenter, coming up with a sack that chinked with new screws. Eban nodded once, like men do when they have not agreed to talk, then could not help themselves and talked anyway. "I was thinking about that word the boy used," Eban said. "Instructed." The way he said it, like the house had told him to sit and wait there, like it knew where he would be safe. Pritchard was a practical man, but practicality is not the enemy of wonder, and he felt a small involuntary warmth at the idea that some places are capable of kindness. He drove home under a sky cold and blank as a clean sheet of paper. Winter came settled and white. The river wore its thin steel skin. The children of the town learned to say Ashburn House without wanting to run away, and to look up when they said it, as if a high window somewhere might be listening. When the year turned and then turned again, the story settled into the town the way stitches settle in a scar. Not ugly, not beautiful either, simply part of the body. Years later, in early spring, when a thaw made the gutters talk and the roads show their winter wounds, Calliope received a padded envelope at the paper with no return address. Inside was a small, neat metal tag polished to a shy shine. On one side, engraved letters, Ashburn. On the other, a number that might once have matched a key on a box or a door. It was warm from someone's hand. It carried the faint scent of old wood and machine oil. She set the tag on her desk and considered writing a follow-up. She imagined the questions she would ask and the pictures she would take. Then she did something else. She walked the tag across town to the new little museum that had opened in the old rail office and placed it in a glass case beside a folded page of the paper from that October night. She typed a small card that read, "Only tag found after the recovery of Orrin Hale, Marrow Creek, year 2014. Donor prefers to be unnamed." The curator, a precise woman named Ione Willett, who categorized everything with tender avidity, tried to ask who had sent it and why. Calliope smiled. "Some stories," she said, "end better when they end." On a Sunday evening, not long after, just at the seam between day and night when the sky has a thin silver bruise to it, Maeve sat with Orrin at the kitchen table. The boy, grown taller and quieter, was working a puzzle of the coast of Maine, fitting rocky bays together with the soft tamp of knuckles. The radio gave the soft clatter of a baseball game far away. Steam rose from a mug. Maeve looked at her son's hands, which were becoming a man's hands, and she felt again the weight leave her chest as it had that night. She did not push the memory away. She let it sit with them at the table. You remember the quilt? She asked. He smiled. It had been washed and mended. It had a new binding now, a bright blue that made the old reds and browns sing. It is at the foot of my bed, he said. It keeps corners. He put the main coast in order and placed the final piece. He pressed it in, firm, and the faint click pleased them both. Outside, a breeze lifted and went on. The house gave a small, approving sound, the kind houses give when the people inside them are safe and the doors are latched. And the night can come as it always comes, with patience and with mercy, and find everyone exactly where they should be.